Welcome to Bandit's Keep. I'm Daniel. This week I want to talk about using the game we love, an old school D&D game, to play different genres. I would make the argument that your kind of typical old school D&D game is kind of like a high fantasy Western, which I'll talk about a little bit. And we can play other types of genres: two-fisted detective, sci-fi, sword and sorcery, which is something people talk about a lot. What do we even mean when we say low fantasy? Let's talk a little bit about that in this video. I'm going to go over 5 different kind of genres that we could play using an old school game. I'm going to talk about some modifications that you need to make that happen, so you're not just like cleric in space. Although cleric in space could be pretty cool. And basically, I'm just going to give you kind of high-level information here. If one of these sounds super cool to you and you'd like to see me deep dive into running D&D with one of these specific genres, let me know in the comments below. This week I have a great new sponsor, Into the AM. You've probably seen these t-shirts around. They are incredibly popular, incredibly high quality, and I was really happy that they reached out to sponsor a video. I chose the Spaceman design today because we're going to add a little sci-fi to our D&D, so I figured that would work. So this group of designers, they've been around since 2012. They're looking to create high quality designs that we can wear and use our clothing to express ourselves. And I think that's a really great mission. Especially if you know more about my other life outside D&D, you know that I have a good connection here. Anyways, go ahead, jump onto their site. There's over 100 designs here that you can check out, from sci-fi to kind of fantasy to just kind of funky, cool designs. 3 t-shirts for $62 is a pretty darn good deal for this quality, and you get an additional 10% off if you use my code Bandits Keep. So jump down in the description, click on the link, find some shirts you love, and make sure you type in Bandits Keep so you get the discount. All right, let's jump into this with Two-Fisted Detective. So this is the last one I thought of, and the first one I'm going to talk about because it's fresh on my mind. So if you've ever read stories by like Raymond Chandler, or you've watched some of those noir movies, you know what I'm talking about. This kind of semi-corrupt LA or wherever it takes place. You've got this detective that's, on this kind of mission because they need the money or whatever. And it's all about keeping, your banter and wits about you. You could run these games pretty simply with something like BX. So how would I do this? Well, number one, if you're going to play in a more of a modern 1920s setting, you'd want to obviously go human only. So that's easy enough. I don't think clerics really work here, or magic on any level really. So you could just go fighter thief. Basically what you're going to do is you're going to say, all right, there's already rules in the game for unarmed combat because you get to be fighting, right? So it's like 1 to 2 damage or something. That's cool, plus strength bonus. I would probably modify this to say that if damage is from fist fighting, it heals up much faster. Not like 1 point a day, but like everything overnight, or 1 point an hour or something like that. If somebody does use something like a dagger, aka a switchblade or a knife, or a gun, obviously that healing would be much slower, if at all, right? Your guns you can just treat as like a crossbow. Easy as that. We don't need to have all these details if we're just going to run it for 1 or 2 sessions. We're going to use reaction rolls to see how NPCs feel. Charisma is going to be really important here, right? We're going to fight thugs. Who are thugs? 0 level people, or possibly classed people at level. You're not going to be encountering monsters. But what you can do, for quick references, you can go, okay, a thug is equal to an orc, right? So like 1 hit die, they can attack like that, same saves, etc. Maybe a regular civilian's equal to a goblin. And so you don't have to make a bunch of NPCs for this, but you do want to make your key NPCs, at least the ones that the player character is going to deal with, right? The casino owner, the femme fatale, the police chief, whoever are going to be kind of the main people they might interact with. Just whip up some NPCs and you're good to go. This one is really character driven and really for the group that just wants to sit there and kind of figure it out. You don't need skill checks for an investigative game. What we need is fun role play with our friends. All right, let's jump into swords and sorceries. Let's roll back a little bit here, because I said that I think that D&D, and you've probably heard this before, is a high fantasy Western. Now, why do people say that? If you're not familiar with Westerns and you don't know kind of where that's at, well, Western movies, obviously they are written from a certain point of view and they're not historically accurate, but what they're generally about is a group of adventurers, toughs, going out into an untamed world and taming it, right? So if you're playing BX or OD&D and your characters are going off into the wilderness to raid dungeons and to slay, ogres and stuff like that, and then they're setting up their strongholds, this is basically like clearing the West. So that's what I mean by that. But of course, it's high fantasy because there's magic everywhere and this and that. Now, sword and sorcery is a little bit different. Sword and sorcery is more about the individual in small situations. Sword and sorcery is not going to be about, I mean, yes, eventually Conan wants to be king, but most of the Conan stories are about Conan coming into a space, there's something going on, and they get involved in it in a small way with a handful of players. Now, sometimes there's armies involved too, but for your most sword and sorcery, you're talking about one or two kind of heroes, if you will, although they might be anti-heroes. And they're going to come into a space, there's going to be something going on, and usually the supernatural in these things is unexplained, bad, and the enemy. So what do we want to do here as far as classes and such? For me, I would use fighter, thief for sure. I would use clerics, but I would remove their ability to wear armor, let them use any weapon, get rid of their spellcasting, but keep the turn undead. Effectively, we're making somebody who is a monk or just a religious person that has some effect on those ultimate evil creatures. I wouldn't use any demihumans, obviously, but I probably would use the halfling class, if you're using race as class, as a human type, but make them like a ranger since they have the good hiding in the wilderness and stuff like that, and the missile weapons. Magic users, those should be the bad guys, right? A magic user is a great bad guy in a sword and sorcery thing. I would take all the spells, both clerics and magic users, and stick them together in one giant list, make them available to your bad guy magician. And the beauty of sword and sorcery is they don't need to be super high level. Think about it. If magic is incredibly rare, that one sleep spell is wow. Now, there are some monsters generally in sword and sorcery. I would stick with giant animals like giant scorpions, giant snakes, or even regular animals, wolves, lions. These are just a pit of regular snakes, right? These are the kind of things you're going to fight. Then you've got your henchmen. Your henchmen, again, like the two-fisted, we can just say use orcs to represent tough henchmen, goblins to represent weaker ones, maybe an ogre to be like the second in command boss, the kind of the real military might behind the intelligent, but scheming villain that is the magic user that's only like third level, right? And the beauty of this is if you keep this like this, your second, third level characters can battle this third level magic user with all their minions. And in the end, you can get that great sword and sorcery moment where the fighter just jams their sword through the villain's heart and kills them in one hit. Because that magic user probably has like 6 hit points. Similar to what you might think we normally do at D&D, we could look at the characters as explorers. My friend Tony ran something like this for us for a while. Basically, we came across an area where it was like a new unexplored area across the ocean. So you can kind of think of it like, air quoting here, discovering new lands. And when we got there, it was kind of, he did like more of a dinosaur type theme, kind of Lost World. And we weren't there to clear the land of all the enemies or to build strongholds. We were there to map and discover. So you can run this in any level of fantasy you want. What's really changing here is the idea and the concept of what the player character's goals are. So in order to do that, we have to do something like change the experience points. Because if experience points are for gold, then the player characters are going to want to get gold. And if they have gold, they're going to want to spend the gold and they're going to make castles, and then you're basically back to regular D&D. In an exploration mode, you're going to give experience for things like just time out in the field, hexes, kind of explored, things that they find. So they travel through 5 hexes, they discover an obelisk, they research it a bit, they come back, they've been in the field a week. All those things are worth experience points. You might even give no experience points for combat, depending on how you do this. And this just changes the tone of the game. Now our characters are exploring. They want to meet new cultures. They want to see what's out here. And they're not trying to, at least at this level, colonize or anything like that. They're just out there to see what's there. And they're mapping, they're making notes. You could think kind of Lewis and Clark-y, can we get to the other side of the continent? What's there? What's over the next hill? That's your exploration campaign. This one requires only those changes, right? Changes in motivation, not necessarily changes in system. Now, I probably, if I was going to do this, would go, again, all human and have your other races, your elves, your dwarves, your halflings, be things that the players can encounter. And as the campaign goes on, if new player characters are introduced, then they can be brought in from those cultures. So you start off all human and you're exploring, and then a new player joins or a player character dies and you need a new character, and you've already made relations with the halflings. Well, you can pull from a halfling, and now you've got something else going on. So I'd let that build. Again, the idea of this kind of campaign is discovery. On the same note, and I was actually inspired by this because I was messing around with HexKit, which is something I use sometimes to make hex crawls, and they've got a whole space section. And I thought to myself, space hex crawls. So let me know in the comments below if you want a whole video on this, because I started working on it and I'm probably going to do it for myself anyways. But I was like, should I make a video about this? The idea of using kind of a system that's in the original first edition Dungeon Master's Guide, where you roll randomly for hexes, which I've talked about before, but they're space hexes. So empty space, asteroid belts, nebula, planets, right? And you're effectively, again, you're going out, much like the exploration campaign I just talked about, and you are investigating to find things. You could even go so far as to land on planets and do hex crawls there, but I'm thinking of this more like you're in a spaceship, you're traveling around. So again, this one you'd have to really consider how your experience points are going to be noted. Is it time out? Is it things you've discovered? This kind of stuff. And maybe you land on planets and you do surveys, and this would just change things. Now, of course, obviously at this point, unlike the regular exploration, it's not just a change of attitude, but we're going to have to change up the characters. So there's any number of ways to run sci-fi, and we're going to talk about straight sci-fi in a second. But basically, if we're talking about Star Trek-y kind of space exploration, just go there. We're going to want all humans, of course, right? And what you can do is, you might think, well, what is a thief? But you can use the thief as maybe some kind of a science thing, right? When you're exploring and you're searching for things or whatever, you can use those thieves, just re-flavor the thief skills to be those skills. So that's your skill guy, your science person. Your fighter is going to be your military people. You can keep magic users and maybe use them for psionics. Again, not just a flavor change, but it does change things, because when we think of sci-fi, we don't often think about arcane, spinning our hands around and twiddling our fingers and using wands. We think about psionic powers. So we take our spellcasters and we turn them to psionics, whether they be clerics or magic users. Obviously, in this kind of setup, you're not going to use all the weapons. We're going to have to start thinking about other weapons here. In my experience, in most cases with sci-fi, again, you're going to run into either bare-fisted fights, or you're going to run into missile weapons. That is, lasers or projectile weapons, depending on the level of sci-fi. Here again, we can use the various bows and slings. So maybe a sling is a pistol, a short bow is some kind of a rifle, a long bow is a laser rifle, a heavy crossbow is like a big laser rifle, and you can really kind of just work those out. So it's mostly based on ranges and such, but nobody's going to be wearing armor. You could have force fields that equal armor class, or you could just simply say people are easier to hit, which again means that you got to be a little bit more careful. So if you're running something like Starship Troopers, you want big, heavy armor. If you're running something like Star Trek, people just walk around in clothes. It's the fifth one, but it's kind of going to tie. I already mentioned a lot of it in the last one, which is your straight up sci-fi. And what's interesting here is, and this is actually part of the reason why, besides the cool chart, that I was motivated to do this video, was when I first was introduced to original Dungeons and Dragons, even though I didn't actually play in the game, it was through a post on a forum, and they said, I'm going to run kind of a sci-fi version of OD&D. They're going to be these classes. They did no demi-humans, and they said you can have whatever laser swords or whatever you want, because OD&D, all the damage is D6. It doesn't matter. So you can have whatever you want. Describe your laser pistol any way you want to. And that's one of those things that really stuck in my mind about how simple it is to manipulate these systems. All we have to do is think, what exists in our sci-fi world? Are we more Star Trek or Star Wars? Are we more Starship Troopers? Are we somewhere in the middle? Are we, what type of sci-fi? Now, when I'm talking sci-fi here, now I'm talking about doing like more of a space opera. So you might want your laser swords, right? Just make them swords. You might want your, big laser rifles, make them heavy crossbows. People might have blasters on their hips, make them slings. It's easy enough to do this. And again, because in these kind of situations, unless you're doing more like heavy militant stuff, most people aren't wearing armor. It means that things become a little bit more deadly, so people are a little bit more choosy. They use cover. It changes the way we play. Now, you might encounter somebody like a Mandalorian that's got armor on, right? That could just be plate mail, because if nobody else is wearing armor, that is pretty effective at blocking things compared to nothing, right? So basically, it's easy enough just to take and re-flavor these things. That's what we have to really understand. When these games were first made, and are still being made, They were just like, oh, we want to do a bow, so they made up a range and they made up a damage. They could have just as easily have made that a pistol. They just happened to have made it a bow. So it's easy enough for you to go in there and go, I'm just going to switch these things up. Now, if you run one of these things that's more complex and you also have bows and you also have this, then you want to worry about extra damage and this isn't realistic, well, then, maybe you need to dig into a deeper system. But I think for a lot of us, if we're just going to throw up a 2 or 3 part adventure for our friends and we want to dip into a different genre, it's fun to use the game system we have. A lot of this stuff, what it comes down to tonality of the adventure and kind of buy-in and the mindset of the players, right? Your exploring campaign is going to be more focused on exploration. Your two-fisted is going to be more focused on interaction with people. Your straight-up sci-fi is just going to be fun, just like regular D&D, just where you're shooting laser pistols now instead of bows. It's awesome and fun, and we can do it all with the same system. We don't need all these different systems to do it. But, end with this. Said it multiple times, I'll say it one more time. If you're going to dive deep into a system, if you're going to run a 2-year campaign and everybody's all set and they're just like, we want to run a sandbox until we're sick of it, then you probably want to pick a system that's good for the genre. But even if you're going to do that, and maybe this is another video, let me know in the comments below, you probably want to test out some systems. So if you're curious about how to test systems, if you're curious about me building out any of these a little bit more and putting out there for you guys to play, if you're curious about just about anything in life, go ahead and put a comment and I will do my best to answer it. Please do check out the description. You will see a link right up top to Into the AM. Grab yourself a shirt. Let me know when you get your shirt. I hope you love them as much as I do. Down there, you're also going to find a link to my Discord server. Go ahead, sign up over there and join the conversation. Lots of great people over there. Finally, my Patreon's down there. If you want to support the channels, I appreciate that. I'll talk to you soon.